Abdul Razak reports from Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the greatest of the major sins is shirk, associating others with Allah, thinking oneself secure from the plan of Allah, to despair of the mercy of Allah, and lose hope of Allah's relief.
There is a major mistake in the text here. Everyone please correct the text. This is not a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This is a statement of Ibn Mas'ud. Delete that the Prophet ﷺ said. This is a statement of Ibn Mas'ud. I don't know where the translator got this from. Big mistake in the text. Please delete this. This is not a hadith. The hadith preceded this one. The one that we said about Ibn Abbas. This is the one that the Prophet ﷺ said. Okay, that the Prophet ﷺ said that. However, this narration is a narration from Ibn Mas'ud, and it has the same meaning, but it is not a hadith, so we have to be careful about that. So Ibn Mas'ud said that the biggest of all sins, who is Ibn Mas'ud? He is a famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ. So he's saying the biggest of all sins, akbarul kaba'ir, the biggest of all sins, what are they? The shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? To commit shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Secondly, to feel secure of the plotting of Allah, the planning of Allah. Basically, to feel secure of Allah's punishment. Thirdly, to despair of Allah's mercy. To feel that Allah will never forgive you. Okay? And fourthly, to give up hope of Allah's help. To give up hope of Allah's help. These are the biggest of the major sins. Okay? These are the biggest of the major sins. When you feel, obviously shirk is in a category of its own. That's a special category. The rest of these things are types of kufr. Okay, to feel secure of Allah's mercy, we already discussed this. To feel secure of Allah's mercy, that Allah is never going to punish me. To feel secure of Allah's planning, that Allah is never going to punish me. Okay, this is a type of kufr. And then to despair of Allah's mercy, Allah will never forgive me. This too is a type of kufr. And he adds a third point, to give up hope of Allah's help or Allah's aid. So if you're in a situation where a trouble has afflicted you, okay, and you ask, why don't you make dua? You respond, Allah will never help me. Allah will not respond to my dua. Okay, this too is a type of kufr. Because it is as if you are restricting Allah's mercy. It is as if you are accusing Allah of not having the power to help you or aid you. Rather, the Muslim, he makes a dua to Allah. And he expects the best from Allah. And then he is content with what Allah gives him. Okay, this is the true belief of the Muslims. So to go to extremes in any of these things is a type of kufr. Let's move on to the next chapter.
Chapter 35. A part of Iman in Allah is the forbearance with what Allah has decreed.
Okay, now we move on to yet another act of the heart. Now, look at the author. He's always now, for the last few chapters, he's talking about the acts of the heart now. He's talking about, what did he start off with?
Feel secure against Allah.
No, way before this. Love, fear, then trust in Allah. Now we moved on to the next. This chapter that we did, the chapter 34, right? 34, it has two aspects to it, actually. Realize that the chapter heading that is in your translation is not from the author. This is added by the translator. There are two aspects to this chapter. Basically, to go to extremes in your fear and to go to extremes in your hope and trust. Okay? To go to extremes in your fear, what does that mean? What would you do if you went to extremes in your fear? What would happen?
You would say that
Allah is never going to forgive me. In your extreme fear, this fear will lead you to kufr. So make sure your fear is Islamic. It is within the boundaries of Islam. Extreme trust, where will that lead you? Too much hope. Allah will never punish me. Okay? So this chapter dealt with both of these two extremes. So after mentioning fear and hope, okay? After mentioning fear and trust, now he moves on to this next chapter and he talks about the two extremes. Now we move on to another act of the heart, and that is patience. Now patience means, obviously everyone knows what patience means, is to bear and accept whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you. Not to curse it, not to get angry at it, rather to be patient at it. To accept and be satisfied and content with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you. So the opposite of patience, right? In other words, what's the opposite word of patience in English? Well, impatience. What is meant here? What is meant here is that to get angry at the decree of Allah, or to curse the decree of Allah, or worse than that, even some Muslims they even curse Allah, astaghfirullah, when something happens to them that is bad. Okay, this is all a type of kufr. It is not possible for the believer to get angry at the decree of Allah. Whatever happens to him, he will accept it, because this is Allah's decree upon him. Now realize that patience is of three categories. Okay, patience is of three categories. The first category is patience when it comes to the worship of Allah. Okay? Patience when it comes to the worship of Allah. So a person will be patient in offering his 5 prayers, for example. So you need patience. You need sabr to continue. Every time the prayer comes, you have to go and pray it. Every time, you have to do religious, you have to go do it. So this is patience for the worship of Allah. And this is the most blessed or the best type of patience. Because it requires stability, it requires continuity, it requires that you're always doing the act like the prayer or the zakah or the fasting. So this is the best type of patience. Underneath this is patience to refrain from the sins that Allah has told you not to do. Okay? So to avoid committing zina, or to avoid, alcoholic drinks, and to avoid, you need patience for this. You need patience, especially in times of temptation. You need to have patience. So this too is a part of our religion. Okay? To avoid patience, to avoid the sins. And the third type of patience is patience at the decree of Allah, and this is the lowest of them, and this is the topic of this chapter. Okay? Patience at the decree of Allah. Something happens to you. Okay? A person, his relative might have passed away, or a person, his business went bad. Okay? This is the type of patience which is of the third category. That he has to be patient at the decree of Allah, and this is the lowest of the three. Why is that? Because it is beyond his control. The first two are in his control. He must force himself to be patient. Whereas the third one, it's not in his control what happens to him, right? It's in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's control. Okay? Now when we say that this is the lowest of the three, we're not trying to say that it's not rewarded. It could be possible that it might be easier for a person to pray 5 prayers than to lose a dear relative of his. Okay? So at times, the lower forms of patience might be more rewarded than the higher forms. But we're saying in general, the most noble form of patience is to what? Pray. Not pray. Persevere in your worship of Allah. Be continual in your worship of Allah. Prayer is an example. Okay? Not just to pray. The best type of patience is to be patient in the worship of Allah. Okay? And after this follows what? Who knows? To be patient in staying away from sins. And the lowest category is to be patient at the decree of Allah. And we have to realize when we say lowest category, it could be, like I said, it could be that a patience that occurs in the third category is more rewarded than one of them in the first category. Okay? So we're saying in general, the rule of thumb is this, but it could be for particular situations. It's not necessarily true for every single situation. Now, move on.
Allah the Almighty said, and whosoever believes in Allah, He guides his heart, and Allah is the all-knower of everything.
We'll move on to what Qatada said.
Al-Qama Rahimullah said, he is the man who, when struck by affliction, knows that it is from Allah, accepts it and submits to Him. Okay, now in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever believes in Allah, Allah will guide him, and Allah is aware of all things. Okay? Whoever believes in Allah, وَمَن يُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ يَهْدِ قَلْبَهُ, Allah will guide his heart. Okay? So the more good you do, then likewise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will favor more blessings upon you. The more you show to Allah, the more efforts you do to Allah, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you and accept those efforts. Now, Alqama is one of the students of, who knows? I don't think we covered Alqama before. Huh? Alqama is one of the famous students of Ibn Mas'ud. One of the most famous students of Ibn Mas'ud. Okay? Ibn Mas'ud, he had a different school from Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas was in Mecca. We said that some of the Sahaba, they founded, if you like, universities or schools. Not a physical structure, but you know what I mean. They had a lot of students that studied with them, okay? Ibn Abbas and Ibn Mas'ud were two of the most famous of the Prophet's companions, and both of them, they left behind them, if you like, schools, generations that studied with them, okay? So Ibn Abbas was in Mecca. This is important to know, you understand the framework, what's going on. Ibn Abbas was in Mecca, okay? And Ibn Mas'ud was in Iraq, Kufa, okay? So we have many scholars that came from Mecca, many scholars that came from Iraq, Kufa. So Alqama was of the students of Ibn Mas'ud. So where was he? He was in? No. Iraq. He was in Iraq. Alqama was in Iraq, okay? So Alqama, one of the students of Ibn Mas'ud, he interpreted this verse. How did he interpret it? He said, this is in reference to a man, an affliction, a musibah, a calamity befalls him. Okay, what does he do? He knows that it is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore he is content and patient and submits himself to Allah. Okay, so this is the man. Who is this man that whoever believes in Allah, Allah will guide his heart? Alqama gives the interpretation of the tafsir. He says, this is the man, a calamity befalls him, a musibah, anything. A relative of his dies, he loses some money, car crash, whatever you want to say. He realizes this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a test from Allah. So he accepts this test and he submits his heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now move on.